everybody here. Thank you for joining today. I am truly excited to be here and talk with Nicola about some best practices when it comes to implementing CLM successfully. That is the headline for today. I'm Alex Booth. I lead the professional services team at Ironclad. So we have a team of very talented people who are responsible for scoping our services, architecting, implementing Ironclad solutions. I'm really honored to be here with Nicola. Like I mentioned, if you know Nicola, you know that this title is a little bit misleading because you are absolutely going to leave here today with more than 5 strategies or 5 best practices. The list will be long, I can promise you that. But the number 5 maybe will hold us accountable to being somewhat organized and not talking at these people for 3 hours. I'm going to let Nicola introduce herself in more detail shortly, but I very quickly want to frame while we're here in a little bit more detail. This slide may seem like a scare tactic at first, but the reality is that many CLM implementations, many SaaS implementations more broadly, do not reap the benefits that companies, vendors, partners, et cetera, intend for them to. And this statistic specifically was from a few years ago, about the year 2024, which just makes it hit a little bit harder. But we've seen a lot of similar metrics around just the hit rate or lack thereof of success when it comes to CLM implementations. And as the entities in Ironclad, KPMG as a strategic partner for many CLMs who have many of these under our belt, we feel like we have an obligation to share all the best practices that we've gleaned, share the pitfalls that we've seen, make sure that others who are considering a CLM implementation, whether it's your first, whether you're moving from one to another, maybe you already have a CLM that you're going to stick with, but you want to optimize. We want to let you know what we feel like you can be thinking about, what we feel like you can be doing to be successful. So today, a few big takeaways for you. I've mentioned most of these already. This is what we're going to talk through. We're going to get a lot of lessons learned from Nicola here. Her experience, what she's come to see is very important for guiding principles for CLM implementation over time. And I do want to note that the relationship that you see here between me and Nicola is very important. Ironclad as a vendor, we are responsible for making sure that your use of Ironclad is very successful. However, with many transformational projects, there is much more than the software, the technology element of the implementation. There are work streams adjacent to that, operational readiness, change management, contract migration, where we rely on strategic partners like KPMG UK to really help us make sure that our customers are successful. And in many cases, those processes start well before Ironclad is engaged, well before you or your company has even chosen a CLM or even decided that you want to implement a CLM. So there's a big part of the chronology that, as much as we would like to see at Ironclad, we don't. And that's why I'm excited to hear from Nicola today, because she's got that full spectrum, holistic understanding of how organizations can be successful. And I think I've built the suspense enough at this point. So Nicola, we'll let you introduce yourself in a little bit more detail and then we can dive in.
Thanks, Alex. It's really lovely to be here. Great to see everybody. My name is Nicola. I'm a partner at KPMG and I run our contracting transformation practice. Basically, all that means is this is all we do. So we work with organizations across the whole enterprise. And I think that's really important. And we'll talk about why when we come to sort of some of our strategies shortly. But we work on the full sort of spectrum of consulting services, technology services. And I would say we've been there, done it, got the T-shirt multiple times, and I'm going to share some of that experience with you today. One of the things that we're really keen to do, if possible, and it seems like we've got a really engaged group looking at the chat on my right, is to make sure that we're answering the questions that you have as well. So obviously we've got some points prepared, but if you have questions, burning questions now or questions as we go throughout, please put them in the Q&A chat as we go throughout. And Alex and I are keeping kind of half an eye on that as we go through, so we can answer those as we go.
We definitely want this to be interactive. Yeah, let's make it discussion based. And I'll start that off. Nicola, maybe a broad opener here. So, like I said, the list of best practices is probably very, very long. But when you start to break those down, categorize, if you have a prospect or a customer who just asks you that open-ended question of how can we be successful, or how can we avoid the pitfalls, what high-level themes do you start with? Maybe we start there, and then we can unpack each of them in a little bit more detail.
Sure. So I always start with three: operating model, change management, user experience at the heart of design. Operating model at a really high level, and we'll talk about this in more detail: people, process, technology. But taking that step back and really thinking through, what are our pain points and what are we trying to solve for? Alex, you gave what was quite a scary stat of 50%. There are other stats in the market that say 70% of technology projects fail. And the reasons very often for that is people go and buy the nice shiny thing that's going to change. You know, this technology is going to transform, it's going to change, it's going to do all of these things for us, but don't start with the why, and really don't think through what are the changes that we need to make in the underlying operating model that the technology will enable. And really, I always sort of hammer that home to clients, and I've seen a couple of names on this list that I recognise, so you all have heard me say this before, but technology is the enabler, and that's the way to think about it when it comes to the operating model. Change management: the minute you start talking about we're going to buy technology, the minute you start engaging with people, your change program has started. And so really thinking through, who are the individuals we need to take on that change journey? What do we want the change to look like? Thinking about the communication, the training, all of these strategic and tactical elements that you want to use is really important. And then user experience at the heart of the design. And I really emphasize this. We are now in an age and in a generation where we all have these, and we're all used to 1-2 clicks and getting what we want really quickly and easily. Have we ever had to have training? I won't name the sites, but on any of the very popular online e-commerce sites and shopping sites that we use? No. Why? Because they're intuitive, they're easy to use. And so really thinking through that user experience, how do we make that intuitive? How do we make sure that we're thinking about our different users along the end-to-end process and journey is really important. And we can talk through these more in detail, Alex, but that's where I typically start to say, have these three things in mind at the beginning of your transformation. This is how we set ourselves up for success.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I am interested, just maybe to frame things a little bit more for the people that are here today. How early should organizations start to think about these things? So if I'm on the call today, and I've yet to even convince my own organization that a CLM is important, but I know that it could be a high value add for my team, for teams adjacent to me. Are there things I can start to be doing now? Is this something that we're really going to gear towards prospects or customers who have progressed their process a little bit more and maybe have already chosen a CLM vendor? What are your thoughts on that, Nicola?
So the ideal, we don't always live in an ideal world, but let's start with the ideal, and then we can talk about if you're in a different place. But for me, the ideal is always start with the end in mind. So starting to think about pain points, opportunities for change. So you may not have bought your technology yet. You might not even be there. You might not even have a business case for it yet. Most organizations are having to build up that business case. So thinking really carefully through, what are the pain points? And that's something that you can engage a partner like a KPMG to do, but actually you can do yourselves as well. Starting to think about that end-to-end process. And I can see somebody on the questions is already talking about sort of financial transactions. The way that I always think about contract transformation is thinking through the end-to-end organization. So whether it's procure to pay, whether you're thinking through your order to cash or your sales processes, contracts and contracting is right in the heart of that. So thinking through and engaging with procurement, finance, sales, commercial, legal, and engaging them on what are the pain points, what works well, what do you want to solve for, and then thinking through what that operating model could be. And you don't have to do all of your design up front. Thinking through some of that up front from a high level is useful. Being really clear on what you want and need the technology to do. And I emphasize that because we have very often come into implementations that are maybe 1 or 2 years in, and the tech isn't doing what we need it to do. And the first thing I will ask is, can you show me your requirements documents? And the way that we would look at that is, what are your functional and your non-functional requirements? Functional meaning, what does the actual, what a legal need? What do you need from an authoring negotiation perspective? What do you want from a reporting perspective? What does the procurement function need, for example? And then non-functional being, what systems do you need to integrate into? What security controls do you need the platform to have? We start there, and then we use prioritization matrix. We very often use a MOSCO, which is the must have, could have, should have, which helps you to then prioritize those requirements. That's a really good place to start, because once you start looking at the technology, it keeps you honest. You can keep coming back to it to say, well, okay, the sales team, sorry, Ironclad, close your ears, are doing a brilliant job, and they're selling us, we can see all the bells and whistles, it's amazing. You need to keep going back to, but is it going to deliver what we said we absolutely must have? That, in my eyes, sets you on the path to success, and then everything follows on from that.
Yeah, I'm with you. Developing the goals, baselining KPIs, those types of things. I will definitely get into those more. I don't think it's ever too early to start to think about those things. It's never too early to think about your current state pain points and channel that frustration into documenting how you may be able to fix them. And the other thing that was interesting to me that you said is, when you connect with an organization, one of the first things you ask is for the requirements. And there's an assumption there that companies have already started to think about those requirements, pain points, et cetera, ahead of time. So to me, that just emphasizes that you all do not need to wait for a vendor or a partner to help you with those things. And you should actually expect that they're going to need you to share some knowledge about your situation to really find any momentum for a project like this. But let's keep going. This operating model one, I think, is a pretty robust theme in and of itself. So beneath that, there's several important categories, and I want to look under the hood a little bit to discuss what that means. Like I mentioned earlier, at Ironclad, we try to guide companies as early as the RFP stage. Our services team, though, in reality, is often showing up after the house has already begun to be built. So in an ideal world, an operating model is in existence by the time that you're working with a partner, by the time that you're working with a vendor, but we are equipped to help you put that together. And Nicola, let's talk a little about exactly what that means, some of the core facets of it.
Sure. So operating model really is just a fancy word for, how we do things around here. What we would normally do, and again, ideal world versus practical, have a high level view of what this is going to look like when you're selecting your vendor, but you don't have to have done all of this. And we would typically, we sort of have what we call a vision phase, where we would be going through this. And then once you've got the vendor, we're going into what we call validate, which is then you're really going into detailed design. So, if you take processes, really detailed process maps that will then be built onto the Ironclad platform. The way we always start, and again, as I said before, we think about this across the enterprise. So what is your organization's strategy? And then how can contracting help support that strategy? So I guess to bring that to life a little bit, our CEO surveys over the last couple of years are talking about businesses really wanting to focus on being more agile around having speed to market. So when you're starting to therefore think about, well, what does that mean from a contracting perspective? How does your strategy for contracting enable the business to do that, to have that speed, to have that agility? And very often we'll come up with a vision, and I've put an example from a recent project we worked on here. But thinking through what your vision statement is, what you're wanting to achieve at this point, and then as we start to come into the design of the operating model to be built onto the CLM platform, we're then moving that into design principles, which again we can talk through in a minute. So for me, number one, strategy, absolutely at the heart, to make sure that you are completely aligned with your business. It's also really helpful when you're thinking about your business case. Most teams won't necessarily have a budget just lying around to be used to go get new tech and move through a transformation. So really thinking through the direction of the business, the pain points that we talked through earlier, and then how your project can help the organization meet its goals will help you with that business case piece as well. From the operating model, we normally start top left. So the service delivery model, which is the beautiful pink box top left, When we're talking about service delivery model, what we mean is, from a contracting perspective, what direction is your organization going in? And therefore, what services are needed from contracting? Now, that will break down. So if you're talking about buy-side contracts, how could the services be delivered by procurement professionals, by legal professionals? Sales side, exactly the same with the sales team. So you're really starting to think through the model. If we then think about, for example, the legal services that are needed, we're having really interesting conversations. And some of you on the call that I know will know this is one of my favorite workshops that we run. But we are effectively going through, what is this new model? What could the new model look like? And with a platform like Ironclad, we're having conversations to say, out of all of these steps in the process, and I should say these don't stand alone, of course, all of the elements of the operating model link. If we think about all of the steps of the process, what actually needs a human versus what technology can do? What should be delivered onshore versus what should be delivered offshore? And there's a real trend in the market for larger organizations that have big offshore hubs, and they might call them sort of GBS, Global Business Services. There's a really big trend at the moment to move contracting services into those GBS hubs for a triaging. So you'd have technology as your first step in the process. It's triaged. If it needs a human interaction, it might go offshore, and then again, triage potentially back onshore. But the service delivery model is where we're working through, what could that look like? What should it look like? What does it need to look like? And what does that mean for your organization and how your organization's already set up? We then move into people, because of course that then has an impact on the skills, the capabilities, the people that you're going to need to deliver all of these services. And there might be new expectations from those individuals, not just, can they use the Ironclad platform, but are we asking them to do different things? For those of you that are in legal functions, we're very often talking about the value pyramid and, automating this sort of bottom part of the pyramid and maybe some of the BAU, so we can move legal to more strategic tasks, to do more horizon scanning, to do the thinking that you as lawyers, attorneys are absolutely brilliant at. What does that mean? What does that mean for the skills, the capabilities, the culture within the organization? And it's really thinking through that. Process is kind of what it says on the tin, and I'm sure I don't need to talk too much about this. Again, we're mapping through, what does the end-to-end process look like? So I've already talked through, if you're starting in Ariba, Coupa, S/4HANA, Oracle, Salesforce, any of the other enterprise platforms that your organization might have, we need to think through, again, going back to the previous slide around user experience. I'm a procurement professional and I'm starting in, I'll pick Coupa just for argument's sake. When I get to the point of wanting and needing a contract, what does that process look like end to end? And then who are the different owners of the processes? What are the different swim lanes that we have? What are the roles and responsibilities throughout that process? Which step is automated versus which step is manual? Because not every single step will be automated when you get the technology. And again, going in with really clear views on, for example, reporting. Yes, we can automate reports, but it still needs a human to check it. And so being really clear on that on your end-to-end process, which really helps you when you then come through to the technology. Because again, when we're thinking about tech, we're not just thinking about the Ironclad platform, we're thinking about your enterprise tech, we're thinking about that end-to-end tech stack. And again, coming back to our user, what is the user experience going to be? What are the integration points that we need? How can we make it as seamless as possible? How can we make those handoffs as seamless as possible? We're then coming through to performance reporting analytics, which again is very often a main driver of doing this. I often tell this story, but I had one client where we did an implementation and they were so excited because all of their reporting was manual. And so they wanted to tick every single box in terms of all the reports they could get and all of the notifications they got alongside it. And then it was about 2 weeks into the implementation and the client called me and said, I literally have to turn these notifications off. Like my inbox, well, that's all my inbox has got. It's all these notifications. So this is why we advise clients to really think through, what do you want? What do you really need up front? What can you get in a dashboard versus what do you want to then come into an inbox, and who needs what? The reporting and analytics can be incredibly powerful, and coming into that with, what do I need to be able to report to the board? What do I need to do to manage my team? What do I need to do to manage my suppliers, or my customers, for example? So really thinking through upfront, again, it helps you with your selection and the choice of the technology, but equally it then helps you as you move into your detailed design and the build around what you're going to get out of it. And of course, governance risk is absolutely central to all of this. So what are the guardrails that you need to have? What is your risk appetite around contracting? And we have, again, some really interesting conversations here. How much do you want to self-serve across the organization? And at what point does something hit a risk trigger and need to come in for review? And whether that's at a manager level, whether that's coming into the Office of General Counsel, for example. So really thinking through that. And then what are the controls you need within the system to make sure that, based on user access, people can see certain things. I think the final 2 points I just make on the operating model, which often get forgotten when it comes to CLM programs. Number one is the template rationalization, incredibly important. Alex, I can't remember the number of implementations we've done, and then we go, great, can you give us, your rationalized templates? And this sort of look of horror is very often on clients' faces, where they say, well, here are our X amount of templates, but we haven't done it yet. That can hold programs up by months. So really getting ahead of that. Again, Alex, to your point, you can do that. If you have the resources. Sometimes it can be quite time consuming, but if you have the resources, you can start that before you've even made the decision on the vendor.
Yeah.
And the other piece,
Nicola, can I ask you, so template rationalization, it's a phrase we use a lot. I do think it gets lost on people sometimes of exactly what that entails. What is rationalizing templates to you? Does it start with the scavenger hunt of finding all of your contracts in the first place? Do you mind detailing that a little bit?
Yeah. Most of the time, actually, from a templates perspective, legal are all over this because legal own the templates. When it comes to the contract migration, that's where we often have to have some tactics to go and find those contracts that are very often still in rusty old filing cabinets or desk drawers. For the template rationalization, putting it simply, it's saying, right, we might have got 20 versions of this particular template or more. And it's rationalizing it down to say, well, okay, can we have one standardized template? And then, yes, we know we might need regional variances. Or, if it's an NDA, for example, we might just need three variants depending on, mutual, for example. So it's really just about rationalizing or reducing the number of templates you have. It's always an interesting process to go through because our legal colleagues love precedent and will have put very often blood, sweat and tears into creating those contract templates. And so the way we typically approach that is have template owners. So we're working on a project with you guys at the moment. We've identified for each sort of contract type. So if we're looking at buy side templates and sell side templates, within that we're identifying the contract type, and then we're saying who kind of owns that contract. And very often we'll have a primary owner and a secondary owner. And the reason we do that is because people have worked so hard to get the templates, people feel really passionate about it. That is not a bad thing. But when we're trying to rationalize them down, we need to have some ownership so that we've got people making decisions on, the relevant wording that will be used as part of that. And of course, then what we're doing is taking those templates and then building that into the Ironclad platform.
Perfect. Okay, I think I cut you off there. You were gonna give a second pro tip there as well.
Second pro tip was contract migration. So again, everyone gets very excited depending on whether you're sort of starting from the contract authoring piece, or maybe it's just we need contracts in a repository. Thinking through your strategy and approach to migrating the contracts across. And Alex, I know you have a point of view on this, but really thinking through what contracts are in life, what do you need? If you were audited tomorrow, could you say, yes, all our contracts are within a central repository, not just sort of as static PDFs, but actually you've tagged that metadata and you can proactively report on them. We do have some clients that come and they'll say, I have got X thousand, X million contracts. And again, there's a piece around saying, are they all in life? Do you really need all of them, because it can be, a big piece of work to do that, even with AI to assist us as well. So it's another thing that just very often at the beginning gets forgotten. It's worth just thinking through what that might look like.
Yeah, I fully agree. Can an organization be successful without migrating contracts? Probably. But to some extent, is it important that your repository is a good depiction of your history? You have the data in there. You can do that proactive reporting, to your point. Also, I would be remiss if on this call I didn't talk about Gen AI at least a little bit, right? CLMs, Ironclad included, are continuing to progress in the AI space. And in many cases, having a robust repository that's an accurate reflection of the different types of contracts, different metadata, et cetera, is very helpful in training the AI and therefore getting the ultimate value out of AI that your organization probably wants to achieve these days, given just the scale and the knowledge that these types of tools can be adding for your organization's value. One other thing I want to mention here is when we do start to gear up the true implementation element of these transformations, we are project planning. We are project planning in mind with all of these goals that organizations have set in mind. We are prioritizing time to value in many cases. And what that means is rarely are we not suggesting some sort of implementation methodology that does not include a phased approach, right? We want you to go live as early as possible, get value out of the platform as early as possible, even if it's in a small capacity that you can observe and learn from. And that can really help with change management too, right? If there is an effort, a whole project within itself that needs to be focused on change management, showing the value of the product in reality at a small scale can be very helpful for getting other elements of the organization on board. So I say that somewhat intentionally, not to send shivers down the spines of anybody who's afraid of the phrase change management, because I know that's the case. Ironclad PS we dip our toes into change management. So for us to successfully get you to point B, we need to thoroughly understand your point A, your current state at the time of design, your status quo. We train end users. We aim to maximize adoption by getting the business involved in the project. There are many things that we do there. However, like I mentioned, in an ideal world, especially for large organizations, change management it's a project within the project. It's a very robust, important work stream. And Nicola, I'm very interested in your thoughts on all things change management, maybe first defining what that really means to you and then talking about how you can just maximize the outputs from it.
Yeah. When I think about and talk about change, I go back to something that every single person on this webinar will be able to relate to. And that is, take yourself back to January, February 2020 and think about how your working world changed, albeit changed overnight in dreadful circumstances. But if you can remember what that felt like as a professional working, and suddenly we moved to this world. And we spent, I think, most of our time telling people that they were on mute, if you can remember. Sometimes we still do with certain individuals. That's change, on a global scale that none of us wanted or necessarily anticipated. But I always go back to, what did that feel like? And if you can remember what that felt like, that's what you've got to remember for everybody that you're about to put through a change program. Comes back to the user experience, comes back to, we've got to take people with us on the journey, because the tech is fantastic. The tech can do everything. The tech can't do it on its own. It still needs us, thankfully, as humans. And so we can't forget that human element. And we need to take our people with us on the journey. So we've got sort of three common pieces where people are maybe against the change, and three areas where we get them for the change. And I can see we've got a couple of questions that have come in the chat as well, so I'll address those in a minute. So fear of the unknown is the first one. What does this mean for me? Again, if you think about any changes within your organization, and we go through big change at KPMG all the time, there's always an element of, we like to know what we're doing. There's an element of stability. And the minute that stability becomes not quite so stable or just a bit unsure, that's when we as humans are starting to think, well, what does that mean for me? And you might start to see, which is the sort of the next piece on the bottom, this kind of loss aversion. And you can sometimes see people clinging on to things. I had an example of a lawyer within an organization that we worked with, and she was 15 years PQE, post-qualification experience, as we'd say in the UK. All she did was NDAs. She loved it. She'd become really comfortable with it. And as a change program, this was about to change her world completely, because all those NDAs were about to be automated. And so it was understanding that to then think through, how do we take that individual with us on the change journey? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to make really difficult decisions to say, these are the people that will come on the journey with us, and these are the people that are going to get on the boat or not, which is, we'll come to the sort of the bandwagon effect in a minute. The other piece is just around this sort of sensitivity to wasting effort. And again, I don't know how many change programs you've been involved with within your own organizations, but think about the amount of time that has been required and asked of you to spend reading documents, going to training sessions, attending town halls, and then whether you can put the value on that. You know, Alex, you talked about sort of speed to value. So those are often areas that we see are challenges when it comes to taking people on that change. But it can be done, and we've had loads of success. So let's talk about the how you get there. We talk about the bandwagon effect. I was chatting to Mary O'Carroll recently, and she talks about the unexpected voice, which I also love, and I always reference her, but I use that a lot when talking to clients now. If you can get a core of individuals that are on board with your change program, and very often if you can get individuals that might necessarily not be the ones that you would expect to be on board, that starts to help with what we call the bandwagon effect. So people are then coming on, they're thinking, actually, this is a good thing to do. You know, this is a great thing to do. You need top down and bottom up. So making sure you've got the senior leadership buy-in, but not just buy-in. When the change happens, they need to be living, breathing, doing it as well. If I, again, come back to KPMG, you know, as we're going on change programs, you know, as a leader in the business, I have to be doing it, not just be seen to be doing it, but actually living and breathing that change just as much as some of the more junior members within my team and within the organization. And once people start to see that, it can create a bandwagon effect. And again, we can talk about some of the tactics, but then you want to be shouting about it from the rooftops, because you want people to know how great this thing is, and then people will want to get on board with it. Communicate and awareness. So, gosh, how many emails do you get a day? How many Teams messages or Slacks or sort of pings you get? So really thinking through how you communicate with an organization and how that works. Years ago, I did a CLM implementation. This is pre-COVID. And once we were sort of into the deployment and you know, really pushing the technology out to the business, we had some of my team literally floor walking. And this is probably old school change, but we had people there by desks so that they could ask those questions when they were doing it. One of the great things about Ironclad, actually, and this is another one, Alex, we've recently done with a client, we're delighted, because the platform is easy to configure. We were actually training people as we went, so we didn't have to have this huge sort of big bang, and we could do it in smaller waves, which meant the change actually wasn't so much of a shock to people, and we were doing it in smaller chunks so that we could break it up. So again, we weren't having to have huge town halls, and it was in smaller groups, so we took people and they could see it, feel it, learn it as we went. And of course, the learning and education, it will be different in different organizations, what works for you. We've recently worked with an FMCG company, awesome branding, so we could be really creative with, you know, what is the design of these materials. We had interactive PDFs with different, I've got to say it without giving away the client, different things that are from their brands that were completely interactive, and we gamified it because that was part of their culture. It was, you know, a really fun organization, and so we got to have fun when we were doing the tech deployment. For others, it's finding what works within your culture to get that awareness and that buy-in. Alex,
Yeah,
is there anything else? Because I've seen a couple of comments in the chat that we can go to, or is there anything you want to kind of touch specifically on here?
yeah, we're doing well on time. I'm happy to go to a question. I think the one that's probably the most pertinent to this discussion that we've just had is the one from David. So in typical CLM implementations for big organizations, Nicola, who do you typically see driving the requirements? It's obviously contracts touch many parts of an organization. There's got to be some democracy involved, but do you see any trends there, especially when it comes to organizations that you feel like do it the right way and end up successful?
I don't think that there. Well, sorry, let me take a step back. There isn't a right or a wrong. I have seen really successful transformations. I think you've got legal and supply chain in there, David. I have seen really successful transformations with multiple different stakeholders, whether it's from legal or procurement leading them. The commonality I have seen is where they have involved the other functions. So whether it's a general counsel, a legal COO, head of supply chain, head of commercial. We're doing one at the moment with a Middle Eastern client, and it's head of commercial and the GC who are completely working together to get it done. But where I see success is where they involve the other functions right from day one, going all the way back to the beginning of this session, thinking through what works well, what are the pain points, how do we work together. Where it doesn't work is where one function go off, and I have seen this with two clients, and it was procurement that went off, made decisions on technology, got the technology in, got all the way into detailed design, and then suddenly said, legal, we need your viewpoints on X, Y, and Z. And it was really difficult because legal hadn't been involved, and they'd made a decision on the technology without really involving legal. And for me, that's a challenge. That's where you start to see this change journey not happening. And this is where you get a lot of, this kind of, well, that you've not involved me, therefore, what does that mean for me? So I think it's about being strategic. I think it's about bringing people along with you on the journey. And I think it's about having the business and the enterprise at the heart of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I want to underscore this, bringing people along the journey, which you've touched on multiple times. I don't think there is any phase prior to the implementation, during the implementation, where it doesn't make some sense to involve stakeholders that maybe aren't even decision makers, right? You're going to have inherent champions of the CLM. Great. You're going to have people that are naysayers or add a little bit more friction to the change management. Identify them too. They can be involved in choosing the CLM. They can sit in the design sessions and start to learn about the change, even though they may not be the decision makers that are putting the final stamp of approval on the blueprint. They can get involved in user acceptance testing, so they get a chance to actually get hands-on in what's been built before it's live and real, and give feedback and have that feedback taken into account. So on and so forth, right? That the concept of super users to help train others in the organization, or be that at the elbow support at hypercare. I could go on, but if I were to emphasize anything that you've said for takeaways for folks on this call, is no matter what stage you are in the journey, think about the people. We love to say, as a technology vendor, we could build a perfect system. But if it's not used effectively, if it's not adopted, if it's not conducive to operational process, these things can fail. You'll be part of that 50% or 70% statistic. So I think we've made our point clear. A good question.
Dan's got a question in around training, which I think is a good one to jump in at this point, Dan. And I can give a view, but Alex, I know you guys will have a view on this as well. So when it comes to Ironclad, I think there are a couple of things for training. You still need to obviously train people. We would typically do train the trainers, so that you have a number of people that are then trained. And Ironclad have the Ironclad Academy, which we're huge fans of, which has so much material that you can use. The other piece that I've seen work really well is where we're doing smaller deployments and we're doing it in waves. We're training as we go. We've just done this with a big healthcare provider, where we were training some of the contracts team and some of the tech team as we went, because at the end of the project, they wanted to kind of own the, if we want to make changes to workflows, we want to be able to do that ourselves. So not only were we taking them through, these are the new ways of working, this is what the new process is going to be, we were iterating on the build of the technology as we went. When we got to phase 2, 3, 4, and the rest of the rollout, they were shadowing the KPMG team on the builds so that they were fully up to speed and in the loop by the time that KPMG left. Now, that's a time commitment, and not everybody has the time, not everybody has the individuals that can do it. But for me, that combination of shadowing, of training, works really well. Alex, is there anything you think I've missed on that?
No, I fully agree. I mean, this concept of train the trainer, I think is very important, because our goal, quite honestly, is to minimize your reliance on Ironclad. We have incentive to make you successful, make you a well-oiled machine without leaning on our services, our training for the long term. And we know that your organization is going to evolve. Things are going to change. You're going to have new use cases. You're going to have new hires. You need to be equipped to train your own team in the long run. And we try to set you up for success, teach you to fish as part of the implementation as a baseline. I would say too that from a training perspective, I'm a big fan of finding ways to get people hands-on. Right? We can all look at a screen or hear somebody talk, but in reality, it's just not going to resonate until you start to use it. And if you can incorporate tactics during the implementation to allow your end users to get hands-on, even the user acceptance testing example that I mentioned applies here, or even afterwards, right? Create test scenarios that people can run through, allow them to be quizzed a little bit on what they've learned. That's something we don't do robustly as an Ironclad training organization. We can scratch that surface, but I think you as an organization know your end users the best. You know your teams and your personas that you need to prioritize. You know their learning styles, and so we definitely want to work and coordinate with you to get the most valuable training approach there. Maybe Nicola, so to me, change management training, like, why do we do this? It's both of those things. It's to maximize adoption. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about adoption. I'm gonna skip a slip forward here so we can do that, because in my mind it's very related. Again, adoption is very difficult, to be honest. No, we always hear from organizations that have gone live with Ironclad, but there's still Nicola, the AE, that is just sending contract via email, and we need to figure out how to get her to leverage the new shiny system that's in place. So, again, there's going to be a lot of principles here related to change management that I'm sure you mentioned. But when it comes to maximizing adoption, Nicola, what are some top of mind best practices that apply there?
So we've got lots of things on here. This comes back to the principle of you've got to do what works within your organization and within your culture of the organization. So I talked about the FMCG organization. For them, we had lots of communications, really visual, interactive PDFs. We had videos that were going out. I talked about gamifying. So the way that we look at the program as a whole and the transformation, and again, I deliberately call it a transformation because this is what it is. It's a transformation, a change program. We think about it as pre-go live, go live, and post-go live. And again, just so that we're all clear, pre-go live is before we kind of click a button and people are using Ironclad. Go live is when people are using Ironclad. That doesn't necessarily mean we're doing big bang, the whole organization have the weekend, come in on Monday and suddenly are using it. We typically just do small waves, which is much easier from a change management perspective. And then post go live. So once people have been using the platform for a month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, what does that look like? Pre-go live is about getting people excited, getting people engaged in what's going on. So it's visual branding. And again, what is your organization doing? Are you an organization where you're all back in the office, for example, or you're in the office on a number of days? Really simple things like having posters up by the printer. And I know that sounds really old school, but for people that are constantly bombarded by electronic messages sometimes, and I say that as an individual that in the office 2-3 days a week, I pay attention to the stuff when I'm getting my coffee and when I'm getting, and when I'm getting my printing, if I'm printing something, which is rare. But some of those tactics are really important. Don't forget the human element here. Having informal conversations and chats with people in person can be incredibly powerful. So really thinking through, when are people going to be together? If you're that type of organization for you, brilliant. If not, when are you going to be together digitally? And thinking through the high level messaging. So, do you have town halls? I was at a legal town hall for a client a couple of weeks ago, and the GC wanted to get everybody really excited. This is coming, but equally managing expectations around when it was coming. So the pre-go live is all around getting people excited, getting demos in, showing them what is this going to look like? What is it going to feel like? Going back to the change management piece around, how is this going to impact me? How is this going to affect my world? Trying to give people reassurances that, this is what it is going to mean. We very often, when we're coming up with a vision, we may come up with a strap line as well. So with one of our organizations, the strap line was, it's about working harder, not working smart. The other way around, working smarter, not working harder. That's a much better one. And that was the strap line on everything. And so again, it came back to the original pain points, bringing it all the way through to, this is what we're solving for. This is why we're doing this, and bringing that into your branding. And we do talk about program branding. For go live, again, countdowns, having mini challenges. I love this 30-day challenge. It doesn't work in every organization, but in some, they're trying to challenge people to see, like, how often are you using the platform? How easy are you finding it? There are little games that you can set up to play, just to get people using it. It doesn't work in every organization. Sometimes there are different profiles of individuals it works with or not, but really thinking about those little tactical piece, having a change champion network. So Dan, I think you asked the question around the training. Equally, from a change perspective, who are your change champions going to be? Who are the ones that are going to be saying, when something's not quite working or there's a bump in the road? Because there will be. These are transformation programs. They're not always smooth. There will be bumps in the road. Who are those change champions that will be saying, I know, but remember, this is why we're doing it.
Yeah,
Try it again.
The cross function, sorry to cut you off, the cross-functional nature of that too. We had a question about, big organizations and who drives this. And I do often see customers that have gone live, and the GC or the head of the legal ops function that maybe has driven the need for the implementation is adopting, and they're playing their part in getting their team to adopt and leverage the platform, but they don't have that buy-in from adjacent teams that are very important, parts of the final sum. And I think, again, to starting early when you're thinking about your operating model and who you want to be involved, making sure that you have that change management captain from each team involved in the final workflow is very, very important. Sorry, Nicola, continue. Just want to
No, that's fine. At KPMG, we have something called digital ninjas, and those. Yeah, I know, it's brilliant. I'm not one, but I know who mine are. They know who I am because I'm quite regularly going to them. But again, so I don't have to go to IT every time. I can go to a digital ninja, and they can help me with various things to do with digital transformation. So within KPMG, that works for us within our environments. And it can be for really simple things like, I'm in a meeting where the tech doesn't work, right through to, when we're going through a change program. And so again, thinking through all of that and what you think will work within your organization, and planning for it, so that, when you're in the thick of the program, all of this is sort of ticking along in the background. The really important piece as well, which sometimes gets forgotten, is the post go live, because I think everybody breathes a sigh of relief. Amazing, we've gone live, the technology's working, we've got some people using it. But the really important piece is, you're spending a lot of money on this transformation, and you need to make sure you're getting the value from it. So, measuring, are people using it, doing those regular check-ins, how are people finding it, reminders to people, and again, you can see who's using a platform, who isn't using a platform. You can see You can get reports on any problems, any queries that may have come through to change champions. They may have come through to a help desk at Ironclad, for example. So really looking at that post go live measurement, and then being able to work towards rectifying it and keeping up that momentum is really important, because there is an awful lot of change going on in the world within our own organizations. And it sometimes can be a little bit brilliant, we've done it, let's move on. And I think it's really important to say, in order to get the maximum value, again, keep going back to what were we trying to solve for? Have we? Is there anything else we need to do? Have we now done it for our buy side contracts? Should we be looking at our sell side contracts? So again, really thinking through that monitoring and measurement. For one client, we use the Net Promoter Score. So the Net Promoter Score is very often used sort of in marketing and communications to measure, how likely are you to recommend someone? But it's also a score that you could use to measure the success of a program and measure customer satisfaction, i.e. your internal customers. And it's a good pulse metric to be using. And you can use it throughout the program. You can kind of do little pulse surveys, and you can do it post live as well, when you're looking at, how are people finding the experience? How are people finding new ways of working? Because again, you can then go back around and say, well, actually, we didn't get that bit quite right. Let's tweak it. Let's make it better, so that we've got that user experience.
Yeah, good point. That, I think there are I'll probably pick two most vulnerable states that an organization can be in over the course of a transformation like this. The go live / post go live space is definitely one of them. It's live, it's new. We need to swarm. We need to make sure issues are resolved. We need to train people where they're forgetting things or they need some sort of refresher, so on and so forth. You elaborated well there. The other is design. So design to me is interesting in the sense that typically in practice, it's a series of sessions over the course of a few weeks, maybe months at most, but it's densely packed. And even more dense is the amount of decisions that we're asking organizations to make as part of those sessions. So it's so pivotal. It plays such a valuable role in getting you from point A to point B, not to undermine the importance of other phases, but design is big. And so I do want to elaborate a little bit on design, Nicola, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes here. We can have a couple minutes at the end to circle back on the questions that we haven't gotten to, and then ideally send everybody off with a long list of lessons learned that they can start to take advantage of. Does that sound okay to you? Talk about design a little bit?
Yeah,
right,
absolutely. So when it comes to design, you probably know me well enough now to that I like a framework for things. That's how we work. But we would always work with design principles. And again, just so that we're clear on everybody knows what we mean when we're talking about design, we're looking at the operating model. We've got a high level design, i.e. we've got an idea of what our strategy would be, with a high level idea of what the processes might be, what people are going to be doing. When we're moving into the design, this is all around the blueprints for what's going to be built into the Ironclad platform. So you wouldn't go and build a house without getting an architect and getting your blueprints and your drawings. This is effectively what we're doing from design. But what we need to make sure is that we've got guardrails and design principles to make sure that when we get into design and then build, we're keeping ourselves honest. We are having a framework to make decisions around what that design will be. And the reason I say that is because people very often get very excited. We can do all these amazing things with the technology platform, and you start to move into customization rather than configuration, i.e. we're just going to tweak things that Ironclad's already built rather than trying to create a whole, sometimes Frankenstein's monster is how one client described it to me the other day, because they had completely tried to change the way the platform was designed. So design principles around having a framework, keeping us aligned to what we have. And we've got some examples here. So increased efficiency. We all want to be more efficient, more effective. So principles that I've seen recently with clients, really simple things like automate wherever possible, streamline workflows, keep it simple. Then when we're going into workshops, as Alex said, and we're looking at the process maps, we keep coming back to, is this keeping it simple? Are we automating enough steps in this? Promote innovation. So again, examples recently, encourage experimentation and exploration was one that a client had. Stay abreast of industry trends was another. And the way that we measured that, again, because it's really important that we're measuring success as well. How is this enabling us to be different, to be better, to be more efficient, effective? So you can then come back to these later on and say, well, has this enabled us to do that? I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to pick maybe just a couple more. Break down silos between teams was one, on the improved communication and collaboration. And I think that really goes to the heart of what we're talking about, and some of the questions we had as well around bringing all of the different teams across the organization together. If you have a design principle like that, it's easy to try and keep coming back to it to say, is this going to enable us to break down silos? Is this going to enable us to work better together? And then once you've built it, again, you can measure that, and you can come back and you could even have a net promoter score against that to say, well, this was an objective of ours. How are we doing against achieving it? So design principles, I would say, really important, because it keeps you on track. It keeps you with your end goal and your original goal in mind, so that you're building for success.
Well said. Well said. And I'll just cap this off by saying this is a big pitfall we see, is even organizations that do a fantastic job up front with the operating model, the goal setting, et cetera, that you mentioned earlier. If you're not effectively threading that through to other elements of the project, you will fail, right? Often the people are different. The people that choose the CLM are not involved in design, so you have a disconnect there. Or even if they are, you're in those design sessions making decisions, but you're not keeping the guiding principles, the big picture goals in mind to drive those decisions. So please do that if you have the opportunity to do that. All right, we got about a minute left here. Rather than recap, I think it may be a little bit more valuable just to answer one more question. Nicola, are you okay with that? I see one about what are your thoughts, Nicola, on using a CLM if your organization does not have a procure to pay solution like Coupa in place? What other elements of value can it add? Any thoughts there?
If they do or they don't have a P2P?
They do not.
If they do not, so we an ironclad or a CLM is brilliant for the contracting. It's not a procurement platform. So if there's no procurement platform, then I think then there would need to be, my suggestion would be, there would need to be something for the procurement elements. Use the CLM for the contracting. If there is a Coupa or a different platform, there are often questions around, how do the two play together? They play really well together. You've got to remember that the P2P platforms are built for procurement, have some elements sometimes of contracting. CLM is built purely for contracting, and that's where you get the added benefits. And lots of clients are now looking at that layering and best of breed to bring it on from a contracting perspective.
Absolutely. Still a value prop. Okay, we did it. Everyone, I really hope this was helpful. It was energizing for me. This recording will absolutely be available to reference. And obviously, you now know Nicola, you now know Alex. Feel free to reach out to our respective organizations if you want to continue these types of discussions in the context of your own company. We really appreciate it. And more than anything, hope it was helpful for you. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Do connect with us on LinkedIn.